A broke janitor, raising his sick little boy, spends his very last $5 to buy coffee for a tired stranger. He thinks it's just a small act of kindness. But the next morning, his world shatters. That stranger walks in wearing a white coat. She's the brilliant surgeon who holds his son's fragile heart in her hands. But just as hope rises, a powerful hospital board blocks the surgery, and secrets explode in the hallway when a little boy whispers a truth that could destroy a billionaire's reputation. The janitor, the surgeon, and a child's life are suddenly caught in a storm of lies, faith, and second chances. Will a father's love and a doctor's courage be enough to fight the system, expose the truth, and save the boy's life before it's too late? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead in the nearly empty hospital cafeteria as Eli Moreno emptied his pockets onto a small metal table. His calloused fingers sorted through the scattered coins, quarters, nickels, and a handful of pennies that clinked softly against each other. The morning shift wouldn't start for another hour, but he always came in early to clean the cafeteria floors before the breakfast rush. $5.32. That was all he had left until payday next week. Eli sighed, gathering the coins back into his palm. The weight of them felt lighter than his worries, but he'd learned long ago that worrying didn't put food on the table. His son Noah needed him to stay strong. The cafeteria was peaceful at this hour, just the soft whir of the coffee machines and the muffled footsteps of the early morning skeleton crew. Through the large windows, the sky was still dark, though hints of dawn were starting to creep in around the edges. A movement caught his eye. Near the coffee station, a woman in plain clothes was fumbling with a paper volunteer badge, trying to pin it to her sweater while simultaneously attempting to fish some change from her purse. The badge kept slipping from her fingers, and her exhaustion was evident in the slump of her shoulders. Without thinking twice, Eli walked over to the coffee station. "Here, let me help you with that," he offered, reaching for the badge that was about to fall again. The woman looked up, startled. Dark circles under her eyes suggested she hadn't slept much, but there was something kind in her gaze. "Oh, thank you," she said, managing a tired smile. "I'm all thumbs this morning." "Long night?" Eli asked, successfully pinning the badge to her sweater. It read simply, "Grace," in neat handwriting. "You could say that," she fumbled again with her purse. "I don't suppose you know if they take cards here." "I seem to have left my wallet in my other bag." Eli glanced at the coins in his hand. The right thing to do was clear, even if his wallet disagreed. "Let me get your coffee," he said. "The machine only takes cash anyway." "Oh, no, I couldn't," Grace protested, but Eli was already feeding coins into the machine. "How do you take it?" "Black." "But really, you don't have to. Everyone needs coffee at 5 in the morning," Eli said with a gentle smile. "Besides, you're volunteering here. It's the least I can do." The machine gurgled and hissed, dispensing steaming coffee into a paper cup. Eli handed it to Grace, who accepted it with genuine gratitude in her eyes. "Would you like to sit?" she asked, gesturing to a nearby bench. "Unless you're busy, of course." Eli checked his watch. He still had 45 minutes before his shift officially started. "I'd like that." They settled onto the bench, the early morning quiet wrapping around them like a comfortable blanket. Grace cradled her coffee cup, letting the warmth seep into her hands. "I'm Eli," he offered. "I work maintenance here." "Grace," she replied, though he'd already seen her badge. "New volunteer. Still finding my way around." Eli nodded, looking down at his hands. They were workers' hands, marked with the honest wear of years of labor. "It's a good hospital," he said softly. "Good people here. They've been taking care of my boy." Grace turned slightly toward him, her attention sharpening. "Your son is a patient?" "Noah," Eli said, and just speaking his son's name brought both warmth and worry to his voice. "He's 10. Has a heart condition? Needs surgery." He paused, swallowing hard. "They keep postponing it. Insurance reviews, they say. But every time we wait." He trailed off, not needing to finish the thought. Grace's hands tightened around her coffee cup. "That must be very difficult," she said quietly. "Waiting. Noah's stronger than me," Eli admitted with a small smile. "He makes these paper cranes while we wait," Learned it from a nurse. Says each one is a wish for someone else in the hospital. Can you believe that? He's the one who's sick, but he's wishing for others. He sounds like a remarkable boy, Grace said, her voice carrying a thread of emotion she seemed to be trying to control. He is. Eli glanced at his watch again, though he was reluctant to end the conversation. There was something comforting about Grace's presence, something that made it easy to talk. He wants to be a doctor someday. Figures if he spends so much time in hospitals, he might as well learn everything he can. Grace's smile wavered slightly, but Eli didn't notice, lost in thoughts of his son. Sometimes, I think he knows more medical terminology than I do. He keeps track of all his medications, knows all his numbers. The nurses say they've never seen a kid so interested in understanding everything about his condition. It helps, doesn't it? Grace asked softly. Understanding what we're facing? Yeah, Eli nodded. Though, sometimes I wish he could just be a regular kid, you know? Playing baseball, riding bikes, not worrying about blood pressure and heart rates. He straightened his shoulders, as if physically shaking off the weight of his words. But we take what we're given and make the best of it. The first rays of sunlight were now streaming through the windows, painting warm stripes across the cafeteria floor. Grace sat quietly, listening as Eli spoke about Noah's recent tests, his paper cranes. The way he helped younger kids on the pediatric floor feel less scared about their own procedures. She clutched her coffee cup a little tighter when Eli mentioned the latest postponement letter, her knuckles whitening slightly, though her face remained composed. I hope, she said carefully, that Noah gets his surgery soon. Me too, Eli replied, finally standing. I should get to work. The floors won't mop themselves. He offered a warm smile. Thanks for listening. Sometimes it helps just to talk, you know? Thank you for the coffee, Grace responded, her eyes shining with something that might have been tears, though she blinked them away quickly. And for sharing about Noah. As Eli walked away to get his mop bucket, he felt a little lighter, despite having spent his last $5. Sometimes kindness was worth more than money in the bank, and something about Grace's attentive listening had given him hope. He didn't notice how she remained on the bench, watching him go. Her untouched coffee growing cold as she sat deep in thought, her paper volunteer badge concealing the truth of who she really was. The wheels of Eli's mop bucket squeaked against the polished floor as he made his way down the pediatric wing. Morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the corridor. His navy blue uniform was crisp and freshly pressed, a small dignity he maintained despite everything else. He smiled at the colorful artwork decorating the walls, each piece created by young patients during their stays. Noah had 3 drawings up there somewhere. His boy's talent for art never failed to amaze him, even when pain made his small hands shake. The sound of approaching footsteps and professional chatter made Eli guide his bucket closer to the wall, making space for the morning rounds. He kept his head down, focused on his work, a habit born from years of making himself invisible while important people passed by. We'll start with room 304, a familiar voice announced. The patient presented with. Eli's hands froze mid-mop. He knew that voice. His head snapped up and there she was, the woman from the cafeteria. But instead of the rumpled volunteer's badge, she wore a pristine white coat. A stethoscope hung around her neck, and a cluster of resident doctors followed behind her like ducklings, scribbling notes as she spoke. Dr. Grace Whitaker. The name embroidered on her coat hit him like a physical blow. The woman he'd bought coffee for, who had sat with him on that cold bench and listened to his worries about Noah. She wasn't a volunteer at all. She was one of the hospital's top surgeons, the very one who kept appearing on Noah's paperwork. Eli's face grew hot. He'd rambled to her about insurance problems and his frustrations with the medical system. He'd even complained about the delays in Noah's surgery schedule. To the surgeon herself. Grace turned her head, catching his eye. Recognition flickered across her face, followed by something softer. She paused mid-sentence, holding up a finger to her residents. "Excuse me for a moment," she said, stepping away from the group. She approached Eli, her steps deliberate and kind. "Mr. Moreno," she said quietly, using his name with the same warmth she had in the cafeteria. I was hoping I'd run into you this morning. Eli gripped the mop handle tighter, his knuckles white. Dr. Whitaker, I'm sorry about earlier. I didn't know. She shook her head, cutting off his apology. Please don't apologize. That coffee was exactly what I needed, and our conversation was even more valuable. She glanced back at her waiting team, then lowered her voice. What you told me about Noah's case, the delays, the insurance reviews, I want you to know I'm looking into it personally. Eli's breath caught in his throat. You are? Yes, she said firmly. The situation isn't right, and sometimes it takes seeing things from ground level to understand what's really happening in our hospital. She smiled, and it was the same genuine smile from the cafeteria, no different now in her white coat than it had been in her casual clothes. I meant what I said about wanting to help, Mr. Moreno. Every child deserves care, regardless of their family's financial situation. A warmth spread through Eli's chest, something he hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. Real, tangible hope. His eyes stung, and he blinked rapidly. Thank you, he managed to say, his voice rough. Noah, he's been so brave through all of this, but lately, children often are braver than we expect, Grace said gently, but they shouldn't have to be brave about getting the care they need. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a business card, pressing it into his hand. My direct line is on there. Call my office today. We'll set up a proper consultation and review Noah's case. Behind her, one of the residents cleared their throat politely. Grace nodded in acknowledgement, but didn't rush away. And Mr. Moreno? She added. That coffee shop across the street makes much better coffee than our cafeteria. Next time, it's my treat. Before Eli could respond, she had rejoined her team, smoothly resuming her discussion of the patient in 304. He watched her lead them around the corner, his hand still holding her card like it was something precious. For the first time since Noah's last appointment, since hearing review and delays and pending authorization, Eli felt the weight on his shoulders lift slightly. He carefully tucked the card into his breast pocket, right next to the small origami crane Noah had made him that morning. The wheels on his mop bucket still squeaked as he pushed it down the hall, but somehow the sound didn't bother him anymore. His son's surgeon had seen him, really seen him, as a father fighting for his child, not just another face in the crowd, and she was going to help. The morning light filtered through the window of room 412, casting a warm glow on Noah's small hands as they carefully folded another sheet of blue paper. His hospital bed was surrounded by dozens of colorful paper cranes hanging from strings, a rainbow of hope suspended in mid-air. Eli watched from the doorway, his heart swelling with pride and worry. Noah's tongue poked out slightly as he concentrated on making the perfect crease, just like the origami book had shown him. Despite the IV line in his arm and the quiet beeping of monitors, Noah looked peaceful. Hey, buddy, Eli said softly, stepping into the room. How's the crane factory going? Noah's face lit up. Dad, look, I made 5 more this morning. He pointed to a line of freshly folded cranes on his bedside table. The blue ones are my favorite. They look like the sky. They're beautiful, Majo. Eli sat on the edge of the bed, careful not to disturb any of Noah's paper creations. He noticed the dark circles under his son's eyes, how his skin seemed a shade paler than yesterday. But Noah's smile remained as bright as ever. A gentle knock at the door made them both look up. Dr. Grace Whitaker stood there, wearing her white coat over navy blue scrubs. Her stethoscope hung around her neck, and she carried Noah's chart. The morning's casual volunteer was now every inch the professional surgeon, but her eyes held the same warmth Eli had noticed in the cafeteria. Good morning, Noah, she said, stepping into the room. I see you've been busy making more friends for our crane family. Noah beamed. Do you want to learn how to make one, Dr. Grace? I could teach you. I'd love that, Grace replied, moving to check his vital signs. Maybe after we do your morning checkup? I hear you're quite the expert teacher. As Grace began her examination, she kept Noah engaged in conversation about his origami. Her movements were gentle but thorough, and she explained everything she was doing in terms he could understand. Now I'm going to listen to your heart, she said, warming the stethoscope between her hands before placing it on his chest. Let's see what story it's telling us today. Eli watched in quiet amazement. Most doctors rushed through their rounds, but Dr. Whitaker took her time, treating Noah like a person rather than just another patient. "Your heart's working extra hard today, buddy," she said, making notes in his chart. "How about we try sitting up a little straighter? Sometimes that helps make breathing easier." She adjusted Noah's pillows with practiced care. "Like this?" Noah asked, straightening his shoulders. "Perfect. You're a natural." Grace smiled, then turned to Eli. "His oxygen levels are a bit lower than I'd like, but that's not unusual given his condition. We'll keep monitoring them closely." Noah held up a half-finished crane. "Can I show you the next fold now, Dr. Grace?" "One more minute, champion. I need to check something else first." Grace pulled out a small light and checked Noah's eyes, then felt gently along his neck. "Any dizziness today?" "Only when I try to stand up too fast," Noah admitted. "Then we'll make sure to take things nice and slow," Grace assured him. She made a few more notes in his chart before setting it aside. "Now, about that origami lesson." Noah's face lit up as he handed her a fresh sheet of paper. "First, you have to make a triangle," he instructed seriously. "But the edges have to match exactly." Grace sat on the edge of the bed, following Noah's instructions with exaggerated concentration. Her first attempt came out slightly lopsided, making Noah giggle. "It's harder than it looks," Grace laughed. "I think I need more practice." "That's okay," Noah said encouragingly. "My first ones weren't perfect either. But Dad says practice makes better." "Your dad sounds very wise," Grace said, glancing at Eli with a warm smile. They spent a few more minutes working on the crane, Noah patiently correcting Grace's folds until she had created a somewhat wobbly but recognizable bird. She held it up proudly. "I think this one needs to join your collection," she said, and Noah nodded seriously. "We can hang it right here," he said, pointing to a spot near his bed. "Then it can watch over me while I sleep." Grace's expression softened. "That's a wonderful idea." She helped him tie a string to the crane and hang it with the others. "Now, I need to go check on some other patients, but I'll come back to see you later, okay?" "Promise?" Noah asked. "Promise," Grace replied, giving his hand a gentle squeeze. Outside in the hallway, she paused to speak quietly with Eli. "He's such a special boy," she said. "I've never seen anyone handle all this with such grace." "He gets that from his mother," Eli replied softly. "She always found ways to make difficult things beautiful." Grace nodded understanding. "I'll be reviewing his case thoroughly today. Try not to worry too much." Back in her office, Grace settled behind her desk with Noah's file and a fresh cup of coffee. She began sorting through the stack of papers that had accumulated during her morning rounds. Halfway through the pile, she found an internal memo that made her blood run cold. The paper was marked "Confidential" at the top, with the hospital board's letterhead. As she read through the carefully worded paragraphs, her jaw tightened. The message was clear beneath the corporate language. Surgeries for patients with limited financial resources were to be delayed indefinitely, labeled as non-urgent cases, regardless of medical necessity. Grace pulled Noah's file closer, scanning the insurance information and payment history. Her heart sank as she saw the notes about payment plans and denied claims. Noah Moreno's name might not have been on the memo, but he was exactly the kind of patient they were targeting. She set the memo down on her desk, her fingers pressing against the paper as if she could change the words by touch alone. The morning's joy of folding paper cranes with Noah felt very far away as she stared at the cold reality laid out before her. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the hospital's basement corridor as Eli pushed his mop bucket toward the staff break room. His shoulders felt heavy, weighed down by worry and exhaustion. The morning's hope from Dr. Whitaker's promise was still there, but the reality of Noah's situation kept gnawing at him. Through the break room's frosted glass, he could see Lila Banks organizing supplies in the housekeeping storage area. Her efficient movements spoke of decades of experience, each item finding its proper place under her watchful eye. "Mrs. Banks?" Eli knocked gently on the doorframe. "Got a minute?" Lila turned, her warm brown eyes crinkling at the corners as she spotted him. "For you, Eli? I've got two." She gestured to a worn chair near her small desk. "And how many times do I have to tell you to call me Lila?" Eli managed a small smile as he sat down. The chair creaked softly beneath him. Old habits, I guess. My mama raised me right. That she did. Lila pulled up her own chair and settled in. Her neat uniform bore the same wear as Eli's, marking them both as part of the hospital's essential but often overlooked workforce. Now, what's troubling you? And don't tell me nothing. I can read worry lines like a newspaper. Eli's hands twisted in his lap. It's Noah's surgery. They keep pushing it back. Insurance reviews, they say. But every day we wait. His voice caught, and he had to take a deep breath before continuing. His heart's not getting any stronger. Lila reached out and placed her hand over his fidgeting ones. Her touch was gentle but firm, like an anchor in rough waters. Child, I've been in these halls 30 years. Seen more than my share of troubles and miracles both. And if there's one thing I know, it's that the good Lord doesn't abandon his children. I try to believe that, Eli whispered. But sometimes it's hard. Noah's all I've got left after Maria. He couldn't finish the sentence, but Lila understood. You listen to me now, she said, her voice taking on the tone that had guided countless younger workers through difficult times. That boy of yours is stronger than he looks. Got his daddy's spirit and his mama's fight in him. And you're not alone in this battle. Eli nodded, drawing strength from her steady presence. Dr. Whitaker said she'd look into his case. This morning, actually. Grace Whitaker? Lila's eyebrows rose slightly. Now there's a doctor who doesn't just talk, she acts. And between you and me, she leaned in conspiratorially, she's got a way of making things happen that others say can't be done. I hope so, Eli said. Noah really liked her. You should have seen him showing her his paper cranes. Lila smiled knowingly. Those cranes of his are something special, bringing color to these sterile halls. You know, I see him sometimes when I'm doing my evening rounds. Always got a wave and a smile for everyone, no matter how tired he is. He doesn't want anyone to worry, Eli said softly. Sometimes I think he tries to be brave for me, when it should be the other way around. That's what family does, Lila replied. We carry each other. She paused, studying Eli's face. When was the last time you had a proper meal? Eli shrugged. I grab something when I can. Lila's tone made it clear what she thought of that answer. Well, tomorrow you're joining me for lunch. No arguments. Can't have you running yourself into the ground. Noah needs his daddy strong. Yes, ma'am, Eli replied, a genuine smile finally breaking through his worry. Later that afternoon, Lila was reviewing cleaning schedules when she spotted Dr. Whitaker walking past her office. Doctor, she called out, got a moment? Grace paused in the doorway, her white coat crisp despite the long day. Of course, Mrs. Banks. What can I do for you? Lila gestured for her to come in. Just wanted to mention something about Eli Moreno, Noah's father. She straightened in her chair, her expression serious. That man has worked here for 5 years, never been late, never called in sick. Even after his wife passed, he was here the next week, saying the hospital couldn't spare the hands. Grace listened intently as Lila continued. He's one of the most hard-working, dignified men I know. Does everything right, never complains. But this situation with Noah, it's wearing him down, though he'd never say it. Something shifted in Grace's expression, a softening around her eyes. Thank you for telling me, Mrs. Banks. I've already started looking into Noah's case. I know you have, Lila replied with a knowing smile. And that's why I'm telling you this. Some folks might look at Eli and just see a janitor. But that man's worth more than half the suits walking these halls. The grand ballroom of St. Michael's Hospital sparkled under crystal chandeliers. White tablecloths draped perfectly over round tables, each centered with fresh flower arrangements. Hospital board members and wealthy donors mingled, their polished shoes clicking against the marble floor. Charles Harrington adjusted his silk tie, watching the room with practiced confidence. At 58, he cut an impressive figure in his tailored gray suit. His silver hair caught the light as he nodded to familiar faces, accepting their greetings with the easy charm of someone used to being the center of attention. Near the kitchen doors, Maribel Santos directed her catering team with quiet efficiency. Her black uniform was pressed crisp, her dark hair neatly tied back. Though she'd worked countless events like this, her movements carried a hint of tension today. "Mama, can I help pass out the tiny sandwiches?" 6-year-old Mateo tugged at her sleeve, his eyes bright with excitement. He wasn't supposed to be here, but her regular babysitter had canceled last minute. "No, mi amor," Maribel whispered, straightening his small bow tie. She dressed him in his best clothes, a white shirt and black pants that matched the catering staff's uniforms. "Just stay quiet in the corner and color in your book, remember?" Mateo nodded, but his attention was already wandering to the glittering scene before him. Maribel watched him settle into a chair by the wall, then turned back to her duties, her heart heavy with secrets. The event coordinator tapped her glass, signaling for attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Charles Harrington, whose generous donations have made our new pediatric wing possible." Applause rippled through the room as Harrington took his place at the podium. His confident smile never wavered as he began his speech. "When I look at St. Michael's Hospital, I see more than just a building. I see hope. I see healing." His voice carried easily across the hushed room. "Every child who walks through these doors deserves the very best care we can provide." Maribel's hands trembled slightly as she arranged appetizers on a silver tray. She'd known he would be here today. His name was on all the banners, after all. But seeing him in person, hearing his voice, it brought back memories she'd tried hard to forget. "Through our continued commitment to excellence," Harrington continued, "we ensure that St. Michael's remains a beacon of hope for our community." Near the wall, Mateo had abandoned his coloring book. His dark eyes, so like his mother's, fixed on Harrington with growing curiosity. Something about the man's voice seemed to draw him in. "Mama," he whispered, tugging at Maribel's sleeve as she passed. "Is that him?" "My amor," Maribel whispered back, her heart racing. "Please, stay in your chair." But Mateo was already sliding off his seat, drawn by the magnetic pull of recognition. He weaved between the tables, his small frame barely noticed by the gathered guests. Harrington was wrapping up his speech, his hands gesturing with practiced grace. "And so, with your continued support, we can ensure that every child—" He never finished that sentence. A small hand tugged at his sleeve. Harrington looked down, his practiced smile freezing as he met Mateo's upturned face. Those eyes? He knew those eyes. The room fell silent. Maribel stood frozen, the silver tray trembling in her hands. Mateo's clear voice carried in the sudden quiet. "Mommy says you're my daddy." A camera flashed. The sound of gasps filled the ballroom as Harrington's face drained of color. The glass of water in his hand slipped, shattering on the marble floor. The evening shift at St. Michael's Hospital hummed with unusual energy. Eli pushed his mop bucket down the familiar corridors, but tonight something was different. Whispers followed him like autumn leaves in the wind. 2 nurses huddled near the medication station, their voices carrying despite their attempts to speak quietly. "Can you believe it? Right there in the hallway," one said, shaking her head. "Poor Maribel," the other nurse replied. "She's worked catering here for years. Such a sweet woman." Eli kept his head down, focusing on the steady back-and-forth motion of his mop. He'd known Maribel from the cafeteria. She always saved an extra pudding cup for Noah on the days she worked. His heart ached, thinking about her situation. The squeak of his wheels echoed through the pediatric wing as he made his way toward Noah's room. Through the window, he could see his son sleeping peacefully, another paper crane taking shape in his small hands even in slumber. A stack of colorful origami birds already lined his bedside table, each one representing a wish for healing. "Mr. Marino?" Dr. Grace Whitaker's voice was soft but urgent. She stood in the doorway of a consultation room, gesturing for him to join her. Eli parked his cart and stepped inside. Grace's usually composed face showed signs of strain, dark circles forming under her eyes. She closed the door carefully behind them. "I wanted to catch you before you heard it from someone else," she said, sinking into a chair. "The board called an emergency meeting this afternoon." Eli's stomach tightened. "Because of what happened with Mr. Harrington?" "Yes." Grace ran a hand through her hair. They're worried about negative publicity, donors pulling out. And, when boards get nervous. She trailed off, looking at her hands. They cut back. Eli finished quietly. He'd seen it before. Budget meetings leading to fewer staff, fewer resources, fewer chances for families like his. Grace nodded grimly. They're reviewing all pending surgeries, especially those requiring financial assistance or extended payment plans. She met his eyes directly. I'm fighting for Noah, Eli. I promise you that. But they're making things difficult. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Eli absorbed this news. His throat felt tight. How long might the delay be? I don't know, Grace admitted. I've already received a warning about scheduling tests without proper authorization. They're watching everything I do now. Through the wall, they could hear the evening medication cart rolling by, its familiar rattle a reminder of the hospital's endless rhythm. Eli thought of Noah's paper cranes, each one folded with such hope. What can I do? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Grace's eyes softened with compassion. Keep doing what you're doing. Be there for Noah. Document everything, every symptom, every conversation with insurance. I'll keep pushing from my end. A knock at the door interrupted them. A young nurse poked her head in, holding an official-looking envelope. Dr. Whitaker? This just came from administration. They said it's urgent. Grace took the envelope, her hands steady despite the tension visible in her shoulders. She opened it carefully, reading the contents with a practiced, neutral expression that only slightly betrayed her dismay. They're placing me under formal review, she said quietly, looking up at Eli. All my recent decisions, especially regarding surgical scheduling, will be examined by the board. Eli's heart sank. And Noah's surgery? Grace's silence told him everything. She handed him a second paper from the envelope, her fingers trembling slightly. It's postponed indefinitely, pending board approval and financial review. The words blurred before Eli's eyes. He thought of Noah's brave smile this morning, of the little blue pills that helped his heart keep beating, of the calendar where they'd been marking down days until the surgery. All those paper cranes, each one a prayer folded into wings. I'm so sorry, Eli, Grace whispered, her professional mask cracking to show genuine anguish. I should have been more careful, moved more slowly through the system. Eli sat heavily in the nearest chair, the paper crumpling slightly in his grip. The weight of yet another setback pressed down on his shoulders, threatening to break his carefully maintained composure. Noah was so excited, he managed to say, his voice rough. He's been counting the days. Grace reached across the space between them, her hand hovering uncertainly before resting on his shoulder. We're not giving up, she said firmly, though her eyes shone with unshed tears. This is a setback, not an ending. But Eli barely heard her. All he could think about was his son's face when he'd have to tell him tomorrow. Another delay. Another disappointment. Another reason to fold more paper cranes and wish harder for a miracle that seemed to keep slipping further away. The evening shadows lengthened outside the consultation room window, and, somewhere in the hospital, a child was crying. Eli stared at the postponement notice, feeling the weight of every word that pushed his son's healing further into an uncertain future. The chapel sat quiet and dark at the far end of St. Michael's Hospital. Only a few flickering candles cast dancing shadows on the walls, their soft light barely reaching the wooden pews. At this late hour, the usual bustle of the hospital seemed distant, muffled by thick chapel doors. Eli's footsteps echoed softly as he made his way down the center aisle. His shoulders sagged with the weight of the day, his janitor's uniform wrinkled from hours of work. The events from earlier, the scandal with Harrington, the whispers, and worst of all, the news about Noah's surgery had left him drained. He sank to his knees in front of the small altar, his work-worn hands clasping together. The flickering candlelight caught the silver at his temples, and the lines around his eyes, signs of years spent working hard and worrying about his son. For a long moment, he just breathed, letting the chapel's peace wash over him. Lord, he whispered finally, his voice rough with emotion, I don't know what to do anymore. His words fell into the silence like stones into still water. Noah's getting worse. I see it in his eyes, even when he tries to smile for me. Tears threatened, But Eli blinked them back. He'd learned long ago that crying didn't solve problems. Still, in this quiet sanctuary, he allowed himself to feel the full weight of his fear. "I'm not asking for much," he continued softly. "Just a chance. Just help for my boy." His fingers tightened around each other. "I'll work any job, do anything needed. But please, please don't take him from me. Not like Maria." The chapel door creaked open behind him, letting in a slice of fluorescent light from the hallway. Eli didn't turn around, keeping his head bowed. Footsteps approached, hesitant and light, then stopped. "Mr. Moreno?" He recognized Dr. Whitaker's voice immediately. Rising slowly from his knees, Eli turned to face her. She stood in the aisle, no longer wearing her white coat but rather a simple sweater and slacks. In the dim light, she looked different, less like the confident surgeon and more like the tired woman he'd met in the cafeteria. "Doctor," he said quietly, starting to step away from the altar, "I'm sorry, I shouldn't be here. Please." She held up a hand. "Stay. The chapel's for everyone." She moved closer, her face softened by candlelight. "I often come here myself, when things get overwhelming." Eli nodded, settling into the front pew. After a moment's hesitation, Grace sat beside him, leaving a respectful distance between them. "I heard about the board's decision," he said, his voice steady despite the pain it carried. Grace's hands twisted in her lap. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Moreno. I tried to—" "Eli," he interrupted gently. "Please, just call me Eli." She smiled faintly. "Eli." A pause filled the space between them, heavy with unspoken words. "I want you to know I'm not giving up on Noah's case." "Why?" The question slipped out before he could stop it. "I mean, you barely know us. You're already in trouble with the board." Grace turned slightly toward him, her eyes reflecting the candlelight. "Because 28 years ago, I had a little brother named Michael." Her voice caught slightly. "He was 12 when he got sick, just a normal flu at first, we thought." Eli watched as she struggled to continue, seeing the old pain etched across her features. "Mom worked 2 jobs, but we had no insurance. She tried to treat him at home, hoping it would pass." Grace's fingers curled into fists. "By the time we finally got him to a hospital, the infection had spread to his heart. They said if we'd come earlier." She shook her head, unable to finish. "I'm so sorry," Eli said softly. "That's why I became a doctor. Why I specialized in pediatric cardiology." She met his eyes. "No child should die because their family can't afford care. No parent should have to count coins to save their child's life." Eli felt the weight of her words, remembering the morning they'd first met him, counting out his last $5 for her coffee, not knowing she was a doctor. "Michael loved planes," Grace continued, her voice warming with the memory. "He'd fold paper airplanes out of anything he could find. When I saw Noah making those paper cranes." She smiled sadly. "It was like seeing my brother again." "Noah wants to make 1,000 of them," Eli said. Something about an old story his mother told him before she passed. Grace nodded. "The Japanese legend. Fold 1,000 paper cranes, and you get to make a wish." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, the candles flickering steadily. "What was she like?" Grace asked softly. "Noah's mother?" A gentle smile touched Eli's lips. "Maria was sunshine. Even when things were hard, she found ways to make people smile. She taught Noah that too, how to find light in dark places." "She sounds wonderful." She was. Eli's voice grew quiet. "Sometimes I wonder what she'd do now, how she'd handle all this." "I think," Grace said carefully, "she'd be proud of how you're fighting for Noah. And she'd want you to know you're not fighting alone anymore." Their eyes met in the dim light, understanding passing between them. This wasn't just doctor and parent anymore, this was 2 people who knew the cost of loss, the weight of responsibility, and the fierce need to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. A clock chimed somewhere in the hospital, marking the late hour. Grace stood slowly, smoothing her slacks. "I should go. Early rounds tomorrow." Eli rose too, suddenly aware of how much lighter his heart felt. "Thank you, Dr. Whitaker, for everything." "Grace," she corrected with a small smile. "After all this, I think you can call me Grace." They walked together to the chapel door, each step carrying them back toward the bright hospital lights and the challenges that waited there. But something had shifted between them, a connection forged in the quiet darkness of shared understanding. The morning sun streamed through the hospital windows, but it brought no warmth to Eli's heart. He stood in the administrative office, a cramped space that smelled of copy paper and coffee, clutching an official letter in his trembling hands. The words blurred before his eyes, but their meaning was crystal clear. Noah's surgery was suspended indefinitely. "I'm sorry, Mr. Marino," the administrative assistant said, her voice carrying practiced sympathy. "It's a matter of funding and resource allocation. You'll be notified when the situation changes." Eli folded the letter carefully, tucking it into his breast pocket. His throat felt tight, but he managed to say, "Thank you for letting me know." Always polite, always dignified. His mama had taught him that much. The hallways seemed longer than usual as he made his way to Noah's room. His son sat cross-legged on the bed, surrounded by colorful paper cranes. The morning nurse had brought him fresh sheets of origami paper, and his small fingers worked steadily, creasing each fold with careful precision. "Hey, buddy," Eli said, forcing a smile. "Making more friends for your collection?" Noah's face lit up. "Look, Dad, this one's blue like the sky. I'm going to hang it by the window so it can fly with the birds." He held up the delicate creation, its wings catching the sunlight. Eli sat on the edge of the bed, his work-worn hands gentle as he examined the crane. "It's perfect, mijo. You're getting better at this every day." "When can I make them at home?" Noah asked, his innocent question piercing Eli's heart. "After the surgery, right?" Eli swallowed hard. We might have to wait a little longer for the surgery, Noah. The doctors need to make sure everything is just right." Noah's hands stilled on the half-finished crane in his lap. "Is it because we don't have enough money?" The question hung in the air like a heavy cloud. Eli reached out and smoothed Noah's dark hair, buying time to steady his voice. "Don't you worry about that part. That's grown-up stuff. You just focus on getting stronger and making your beautiful cranes." A knock at the door saved him from further explanation. Lila Banks stood in the doorway, her housekeeping cart parked outside. Her kind eyes took in the scene, and she seemed to read the situation immediately. "Good morning, my sunshine boys," she called out, her warm voice filling the room. "Noah, honey, I brought you something special." She pulled a small package of rainbow-colored paper from her pocket. "Found these at the craft store and thought of you." Noah's eyes widened with delight. "Thank you, Miss Lila. Look at all the colors." While Noah explored his new treasure, Lila moved closer to Eli. "I heard about the letter," she whispered. "Reverend Bell is already making calls. We're not giving up." Eli nodded, grateful for her support, but feeling helpless all the same. "They say it's about resources, but we all know what that means. People like us, we're always at the bottom of the list." "Now you listen to me, Eli Moreno," Lila said firmly but quietly. "You're worth just as much as anybody walking these halls with a fancy title or a fat wallet. And that boy of yours?" She glanced at Noah, who was showing his latest crane to the morning nurse. "He deserves every chance at life." The morning passed in a blur. Eli went through his cleaning routine mechanically, his mind constantly returning to the letter in his pocket. He mopped floors that would just get dirty again, wiped windows that would collect new fingerprints, and emptied trash cans that would fill up by evening. The repetitive nature of his work usually brought him peace, but today it felt like a metaphor for his struggle always cleaning up, never getting ahead. During his lunch break, he sat alone in the staff room, the sandwich he'd packed sitting untouched. The TV mounted on the wall was playing a news segment about Charles Harrington's donation to the hospital last year. The reporter praised the businessman's generosity while showing footage of him cutting a ribbon at the new wing's opening ceremony. Eli's fingers curled into fists. All that money for fancy buildings and PR events, but they couldn't find funding for his son's surgery. The injustice of it burned in his chest. A group of doctors passed by the break room, their white coats pristine, their voices confident as they discussed cases and treatment plans. Among them was Dr. Grace Whitaker, looking tired but determined. She caught Eli's eye through the window and gave him a subtle nod. Back on his rounds, Eli pushed his mop bucket past the pediatric ward. The sound of children laughing mixed with the beeping of monitors and the squeak of his wheels on the polished floor. He paused outside Noah's room, watching through the window as his son taught another young patient how to fold a paper crane. Noah's face was a little paler today, his movements a bit slower. The doctors had warned that his condition would gradually worsen without intervention. Time was not on their side. The afternoon shift brought Eli to the administrative wing. He cleaned around expensive desks and carefully dusted framed certificates, trying not to look at the papers that detailed budgets and policies, papers that determined fates like Noah's with cold numbers and percentages. "Mr. Marino?" He turned to find Dr. Whitaker standing in the doorway of an empty office. She closed the door behind her and spoke in a low voice. "I've been reviewing Noah's file all morning. The board's decision is problematic, to say the least." Eli leaned on his mop handle, suddenly feeling every hour of missed sleep, every worry line on his face. "They said it's about resources. It's about priorities," Grace corrected, her jaw set in a way that reminded him of steel. "And someone needs to remind them what those should be." A maintenance call crackled over Eli's radio, demanding his attention. He gripped his mop tightly, feeling the familiar texture of the handle, a tool that was supposed to help him provide for his family, yet now seemed to represent his powerlessness in the face of a system that valued profits over people. Across the hall, Grace stood in the doorway, her white coat a stark contrast to the shadows gathering in the corridor. Her expression was fierce and determined, a look that spoke of battles chosen and lines drawn. In that moment, Eli understood with perfect clarity. They were facing a fight bigger than either of them. But at least they weren't facing it alone. The hospital cafeteria hummed with its usual mid-morning quiet. Grace sat at a corner table with Lila Banks and Reverend Audrey Bell, their heads bent close together over cups of cooling coffee. Sunlight filtered through the large windows, casting long shadows across their concerned faces. "We need to rally the community," Lila said, her voice low but fierce. "These children aren't just case numbers. They're our babies, and we can't let them slip through the cracks." Reverend Bell nodded, her silver hair catching the light. "The church network is strong. We've got 15 congregations in our area alone, and they all understand what it means to help a child in need." Grace wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, drawing comfort from its warmth. "The board's using terms like resource allocation and funding priorities, but what they really mean is they're choosing which children deserve care based on their parents' bank accounts." Her voice cracked slightly. "It's not right." "It sure ain't," Lila agreed, straightening her navy blue supervisor's uniform. "But we need faces and stories to make people understand. Numbers don't move hearts. People do." Through the cafeteria windows, they spotted Eli pushing his cleaning cart down the hallway. Reverend Bell raised her hand, catching his attention. He hesitated, then steered his cart toward the cafeteria entrance. "Eli," Lila called softly, "come join us for a minute." He approached their table slowly, his shoulders tight with the weight of the morning's news. "I should keep working," he said. But Lila was already pulling out a chair. "Sit," she commanded gently. "We need to talk about Noah." Grace watched as Eli sank into the chair, his exhaustion visible in every line of his face. "We're discussing ways to fight this," she explained. "But we need your help." "My help?" Eli's laugh was hollow. "What can I do? I'm just a janitor." Reverend Bell reached across the table, her weathered hand covering his. "You're Noah's father. Your voice matters most in this fight. We need you to speak up," Grace added carefully. "To share your story. Help people understand what these delays mean for families like yours." Eli's fingers drummed nervously on the table. "I don't like drawing attention. Been trying to handle things quietly, with dignity." "There's dignity in standing up for what's right," Lila said firmly. "And you won't be standing alone." Reverend Bell pulled out a small notebook from her purse. "I can start with the prayer chains. Get the word out to all our sister churches. When people hear about Noah, about his love for those paper cranes and his brave heart, both the real one and the spiritual one, they'll want to help." Eli's eyes grew distant, focusing on something beyond the cafeteria walls. "Noah asked me this morning when he could make his cranes at home. His voice was barely above a whisper. How do I tell him I don't know anymore? Grace felt her own throat tighten. Then, let's change that answer. Together. The community has resources we haven't tapped yet, Reverend Bell explained, making notes in her book. Church fundraisers, social media campaigns, maybe even local news coverage. People need to know what's happening in their own hospital. Lila nodded vigorously. My housekeeping staff alone knows half the city. Word travels fast when we put our minds to it. Eli sat quietly for a long moment, his work-roughened hands clasped tightly together. Finally he looked up, meeting each of their gazes in turn. "Noah's all I have," he said simply. "If speaking up might help him, and other kids like him, I'll do it." Reverend Bell's face brightened. "I'll start making calls today. The Wednesday night prayer group has over 60 members, and they each know dozens more. By Sunday, we'll have hundreds of people praying for Noah and spreading the word. And I'll talk to my nurses," Grace added. "Many of them have seen Noah grow up here. They know his case, they care about him. They might have ideas we haven't thought of." Lila stood up, straightening her uniform with purpose. "I've got some calls to make myself. The housekeeping union meets tonight. Might be time to remind them how many children they see in these halls every day." As their small group began to disperse, Reverend Bell already had her phone out, fingers moving swiftly over the keypad. "Hello, Margaret. It's Audrey. Listen, I need you to activate the prayer chain. There's a special little boy who needs our help." She walked toward the chapel, her voice fading, but her words carrying a new spark of hope through the hospital corridors. Behind her, Eli returned to his cart, his steps a little lighter, while Grace and Lila exchanged determined looks before heading their separate ways. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the third-floor waiting room windows as Maribel Santos methodically wiped down the low tables. Her movements were precise but distracted, her mind clearly elsewhere as she adjusted magazines with trembling hands. Dark circles under her eyes betrayed sleepless nights since the incident with Harrington. Eli noticed her as he emptied the nearby trash bins. He'd seen that same worried look too many times in the mirror not to recognize it. Without saying a word, he grabbed an extra cleaning cloth and started helping her with the tables. Maribel glanced up, surprised. "Oh, Eli, you don't have to." "It's okay," he said softly. "Sometimes it helps to stay busy." She paused, clutching her cleaning spray bottle tight. "You've heard, haven't you? About what happened with Mr. Harrington?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "News travels fast in hospitals," Eli admitted, keeping his tone gentle. "But I try not to listen to gossip." Tears welled up in Maribel's eyes. She quickly wiped them away with her sleeve. "I never wanted this scandal. I never wanted any of this." She sank into one of the waiting room chairs, her shoulders slumping. I just wanted Mateo to have a father who acknowledged him." Eli set down his cleaning supplies and sat in the chair next to her, leaving enough space to be respectful. "You're looking out for your boy. There's no shame in that." "3 jobs, Maribel said, shaking her head. "I work 3 jobs to give Mateo a good life. The hotel, here at the hospital events, weekend shifts at the diner. I never asked Charles for anything all these years." Her voice grew stronger with anger and hurt. "But Mateo started asking questions about his father. He sees other kids with their dads at school. How do I explain?" "You can't," Eli said quietly. "Some things don't have good explanations." Maribel smoothed her uniform skirt, her hands still shaking slightly. "Charles came to my apartment last night. Offered me money to keep quiet, to take Mateo and move away." She looked up at Eli, her eyes fierce despite her tears. "He said it would be better for everyone." "Better for him, you mean?" Eli replied, his voice carrying a hint of steel. "He offered enough to pay for Mateo's college someday." Maribel's voice wavered. "Part of me wants to take it, to give Mateo a chance at a better future. But it feels wrong." Eli finished for her. She nodded. "Like I'm selling our dignity, like I'm teaching Mateo that it's okay to be hidden away, to be ashamed of who he is." Eli was quiet for a moment, remembering his own struggles after his wife passed. The temptation to take easier paths, to give up fighting. "When my Maria died," he said slowly, There were times I could barely keep going. The medical bills, raising Noah alone, working whatever jobs I could find. People suggested I send Noah to live with relatives who could give him more. Maribel turned to face him fully, listening. But children need more than just money, Eli continued. They need to see us stand up with dignity, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. He met her eyes. Mateo doesn't need a trust fund. He needs to know his mama fought for him to be recognized, to be valued. Fresh tears spilled down Maribel's cheeks, but her back straightened. "You're right," she whispered. "My son deserves to walk in the light, not to be hidden in shadows. And you deserve respect," Eli added firmly. "Not hush money." Maribel stood up, squaring her shoulders. She picked up her cleaning supplies with steady hands now. "Thank you, Eli," she said. "I needed to hear that. I'm going to tell Charles that Mateo and I won't be bought off. We'll face whatever comes with our heads held high." The determination in her voice made Eli smile. He recognized the strength of a parent who'd found their footing again, ready to fight for their child's future with renewed purpose. The fluorescent lights hummed in Grace's office as the clock ticked past midnight. She sat at her desk, surrounded by stacks of medical files and insurance forms. Her white coat hung on a hook nearby, replaced by a warm cardigan against the night chill. The hospital corridors outside had grown quiet, save for the occasional squeak of nurses' shoes during night rounds. Grace rubbed her tired eyes and focused again on the charity application form on her computer screen. Noah's medical history filled page after page, dates, procedures, medication lists. Her fingers paused over the keyboard as she reached the section marked, "Urgency of Care Required." A framed photo on her desk caught her eye, a young boy with a gap-toothed smile, wearing a Little League uniform. Tommy, her brother. Grace picked up the frame, her throat tightening as memories flooded back. "We'll get you to the doctor soon, Tommy," she heard her mother's voice echo from 25 years ago. "Just need one more paycheck." But soon had come too late. What started as a simple infection had spread, becoming something far worse. By the time they'd finally gotten Tommy to the emergency room, his fever had spiked dangerously high. Grace remembered holding his burning hand through that long night, promising him everything would be okay. She set the photo down with trembling fingers. The same words echoed now, decades later. "Just need to wait a little longer." Different voices, different boardroom, same cruel delay. She wouldn't let Noah become another Tommy. Grace pulled up another browser window and began searching through medical foundations, non-profit organizations, and hospital partnership programs. Her notepad filled with names and phone numbers. Each no or waiting list response only made her more determined. Hours passed as she built her case. She documented every detail of Noah's condition, every risk of delay, every possible funding avenue. Her coffee grew cold, forgotten beside her keyboard. Around 3 a.m., she found herself staring at Tommy's photo again. "I'm trying, little brother," she whispered. "I'm trying to make it right." A soft knock at her door startled her. Eli stood in the doorway, surprise on his face at finding her still there. He wore his dark blue custodial uniform, mop in hand. "Dr. Whitaker?" "I'm sorry. I didn't expect anyone to be here this late." "Come in, Eli," Grace said, straightening in her chair. "Actually, I'm glad you're here. I want to show you something." Eli propped his mop against the wall and stepped inside. Grace turned her computer monitor so he could see. "I've been working on alternative funding pathways for Noah's surgery," she explained, pointing to various documents on the screen. "There's a Children's Health Foundation in Denver that looks promising. And I've reached out to 3 surgical equipment companies about charitable donations." Eli leaned closer, his eyes moving over the complex medical terminology and financial figures. His hand gripped the edge of her desk. "You've been doing all this?" he asked softly. "For Noah?" Grace nodded, suddenly self-conscious about the mess of papers and empty coffee cups scattered across her desk. "I know what it's like, waiting for help, that seems like it will never come. No child should have to wait when they're hurting." Eli's eyes met hers, and she saw them shine with unshed tears. "Dr. Whitaker, I don't know how to thank you." "Grace," she corrected gently. "Please, call me Grace." Grace, he repeated, his voice rough with emotion. You didn't have to stay so late, work so hard. Yes, I did, she said firmly. Every child deserves a fighting chance. Noah deserves his chance. Eli looked down at the papers again, blinking hard. His calloused hand still rested on her desk, inches from her own. The late hour and shared purpose seemed to soften the usual professional boundaries between them. I keep telling Noah to be brave, Eli said quietly. But sometimes, I'm terrified. Grace found herself reaching out, placing her hand over his. His skin was warm, and she felt the slight tremor in his fingers. That's what makes you a good father, she said. You're scared, but you keep going anyway. Keep fighting anyway. They stayed like that for a moment, connected by shared understanding and purpose. Then Eli straightened, clearing his throat. I should let you get some rest, he said. You've done so much already. Grace withdrew her hand, suddenly aware of how intimate the moment had felt. I'll call you as soon as I hear anything from the foundation, she promised. Eli nodded, retrieved his mop, and paused at the door. Thank you, Grace, for everything. After he left, Grace sat back in her chair, her hand still tingling where it had touched his. She looked at Tommy's photo one more time, then turned back to her computer with renewed determination. She had more calls to make when morning came. Charles Harrington stood awkwardly in the small park near the hospital, his polished leather shoes out of place on the wood chips beneath the swings. He checked his Rolex again, 4:15 p.m. Maribel had insisted on this meeting, choosing a public place where Mateo would feel comfortable. A flash of bright yellow caught his eye. Mateo bounded across the playground wearing a Batman t-shirt, his small sneakers lighting up with each step. Maribel followed close behind, her work uniform exchanged for simple jeans and a sweater. Remember what we talked about, Maribel said softly to Mateo, keeping her distance from Harrington. Be polite. Mateo looked up at Harrington with open curiosity. Hi. Mommy says you wanted to meet me. Do you like Batman too? Harrington cleared his throat, thrown off by the direct question. I haven't watched many superhero movies. You should. Batman doesn't have powers, but he helps people anyway. Mateo climbed onto a swing. Can you push me? Harrington glanced at Maribel, who gave a small nod. He moved behind the swing, giving it a gentle push. Higher, Mateo laughed. I want to go super high. As he pushed the swing, Harrington felt something crack in his carefully maintained facade. The boy's laughter was infectious, pure and unburdened by the adult complexities that had led to this moment. My friend Noah is sick, Mateo said between swoops of the swing. He's in the hospital where you work. Do you know him? I don't actually work there. I just help with money sometimes. Oh. Mateo dragged his feet to slow down. Noah needs an operation, but his dad doesn't have enough money. Could you help him? The question, so innocently asked, hit Harrington like a physical blow. He stopped pushing the swing, his hands trembling slightly. Sometimes it's complicated, helping people, he managed. Mateo twisted around to look at him. Why? If you have money and someone needs help, isn't it easy? Harrington sat heavily on the adjacent swing, his expensive suit collecting wood chip dust. You ask good questions, Mateo. Mommy says I'm good at that. Mateo kicked his legs, starting to swing again. She also says you're my daddy, but you were scared to meet me. Were you scared I wouldn't like Batman? A laugh escaped Harrington before he could stop it, half pain, half genuine amusement. No, that wasn't it. I was scared because I made bad choices a long time ago, and meeting you meant facing those choices. Did you need a timeout? That's what happens when I make bad choices. Maribel, who had been watching silently from a nearby bench, covered her mouth to hide a smile. Maybe I did, Harrington admitted. A very long time out. They swung in companionable silence for a few minutes. Mateo hummed the Batman theme song under his breath. Do you have other kids? He asked suddenly. No. You're the only one. So I'm special? Harrington's throat tightened. Yes. Very special. Cool. Mateo jumped off the swing with the fearless energy of childhood. Want to see me do the monkey bars? I can do them all by myself now. For the next hour, Harrington found himself drawn into Mateo's world. They explored the playground equipment, built a sand castle, and talked about school. Each moment stripped away another layer of his carefully constructed defenses. As the sun began to set, Maribel stood up. "Time to go home, mijo. You have homework." "Oh, Mom." But Mateo gave in gracefully. He turned to Harrington. "Will you come see me again?" "I'd like that," Harrington said, surprising himself with how much he meant it. After Maribel and Mateo left, Harrington sat alone on the bench for a long time. Finally, he pulled out his phone and called Grace's office. 20 minutes later, he paced in front of her desk while she listened patiently. "I want to set up a fund," he said abruptly. "A permanent one, for children who need surgery but can't afford it. We'll call it the Charity Surgical Window." Grace leaned forward. "That would be wonderful, but the board—" "I'll convince them." Harrington's voice held new determination. "Today I saw everything I've been running from reflected in a 6-year-old's eyes. He asked me why helping people isn't easy when you have money. And I realized, it is easy. We're the ones who make it complicated." "What changed your mind?" Harrington paused by the window, watching the last rays of sunlight fade. "Mateo showed me his world for an hour. No judgment, no agenda. Just pure acceptance and questions that cut straight through every excuse I've hidden behind." He asked if I could help his friend Noah. He turned back to Grace. "Can I?" Grace nodded slowly. "If you can get the board's approval, absolutely. Then that's what I'll do. It's time I stopped taking the easy way out. My son." His voice caught on the word. "My son deserves better than the man I've been. And children like Noah deserve better than a system that values profits over their lives." The hospital cafeteria buzzed with unusual energy for a Tuesday afternoon. Lila Banks stood at the center of it all, clipboard in hand, directing traffic like a seasoned conductor. Folding tables lined the walls, covered in homemade dishes that filled the air with mouth-watering aromas. "Those deviled eggs go right there, Margaret," Lila called out to one of the night shift nurses. "And Clara, honey, set that casserole next to Betty's mac and cheese." Workers from every department filtered in and out during their breaks. Cafeteria staff, maintenance crews, nurses, and techs all stopped by, dropping off food or signing the petition that lay prominently on a table near the entrance. "This is what community looks like," Lila said softly to herself, watching people gather around the tables. Eli pushed his mop bucket past the cafeteria entrance, trying to stay focused on his work. But Lila spotted him immediately. "Eli Moreno, you get in here right now," she commanded, her voice carrying that motherly tone that brooked no argument. He hesitated, then parked his bucket by the wall and stepped inside. The room fell quiet for a moment as people noticed him. Someone started clapping, and soon the whole room joined in. Eli's face flushed. "Please, you don't have to—" "Yes, we do," said Carmen from the laundry department. She stepped forward and squeezed his hand. "We're family here. Your fight is our fight." Reverend Bell stood near the petition table, her presence lending weight to the gathering. "The church ladies have been cooking since dawn," she said, gesturing to the loaded tables. "And look at this petition. We're over 300 signatures already." Eli walked over to look at the pages. Names filled every line, accompanied by heartfelt messages of support. He recognized handwriting from people he passed in the halls every day, people whose coffee cups he'd picked up, whose offices he'd cleaned. "I had no idea." His voice trailed off. "That's because you're too busy taking care of everyone else to notice how many people care about you and Noah," Lila said, putting an arm around his shoulders. The cafeteria doors swung open again as Grace entered. She paused, taking in the scene, then made her way to Eli's side. "The nurses on pediatrics wanted me to tell you something," she said. "They've been collecting spare craft supplies. They're planning something special for Noah's room." As if on cue, Sarah, one of the pediatric nurses, hurried in with a box full of colorful paper. "We've got volunteers folding cranes during their breaks," she announced. "Noah's been teaching everyone his technique." Eli remembered how Noah had learned origami during one of his longer hospital stays, how it gave him something to focus on besides the beeping machines and needle sticks. The thought of others taking time to fold cranes for his son made his throat tight with emotion. Throughout the afternoon, people continued streaming in. Security guards stopped by during shift changes. Physical therapists came down between appointments. Even some of the doctors slipped in quietly, adding their names to the petition. Lila kept everything running smoothly, making sure everyone who wanted to contribute felt included. She had a special talent for connecting people, for turning individual concern into collective action. "Remember when my Tommy was sick last year?" a young custodian named James asked Eli. "You covered my shifts so I could stay with him. Never asked for anything in return. Well, this is me returning the favor." He pressed a folded crane into Eli's hand. The paper crane was slightly crooked, clearly made by inexperienced hands, but that only made it more touching. Eli carefully tucked it into his pocket, next to his heart. As the day wore on, Eli had to return to his duties, but Lila insisted he take a plate of food with him. "Can't fight the good fight on an empty stomach," she declared, piling it high with Southern comfort food. When his shift finally ended, Eli made his way up to Noah's room in pediatrics. He stopped in the doorway, stunned by what he saw. Delicate paper cranes hung from strings across the ceiling, dancing gently in the air-conditioning breeze. They formed rainbow patterns, blues fading to greens, yellows melting into oranges and reds. Some were perfectly folded, others charmingly imperfect, each representing someone's wish for Noah's recovery. Noah sat up in bed, eyes wide with wonder as he watched the cranes twirl above him. "Dad, look!" he exclaimed. "Sister Mary said people have been making them all day. She said each one is like a prayer." Eli moved closer to his son's bed, reaching up to touch one of the paper birds. It spun slowly, catching the late afternoon light from the window. "And look what Miss Carmen made," Noah continued, pointing to a sign on the wall. In careful lettering it read, "Noah's Crane Family, each one made with love." The sheer number of cranes was overwhelming. Dozens upon dozens, each representing someone who had taken time out of their day to fold paper into hope. Some had messages written on their wings. "Stay strong, Noah. We're all rooting for you. God bless you, brave boy." Eli sank into the chair beside Noah's bed, overcome by the tangible evidence of so much care. He pulled out the slightly crumpled crane James had given him and added it to a string. "That one's a little wonky," Noah observed with a giggle. "Just like some of the best hearts," Eli replied, thinking of all the imperfect but beautiful ways people had shown their support today. Noah reached for his father's hand. "Dad, I didn't know we had so many friends." "Neither did I, my Joe," Eli whispered, watching the paper cranes dance above them in the fading light. "Neither did I." Dr. Grace Whitaker burst through the pediatric ward doors, her white coat flowing behind her like wings. Her eyes darted around, searching. She spotted Eli near the nurse's station, methodically cleaning the windows with slow, circular motions. "Eli," her voice cracked with emotion. "They approved it." Eli's hand froze mid-wipe, the cloth dropping forgotten to the floor. "What?" Grace pulled out a fresh surgical consent form, her hands trembling slightly. "The board just reinstated select surgeries. Noah's is scheduled for tomorrow morning at 7. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "First slot." Eli stared at the paper, his vision blurring. The words swam before his eyes as the reality slowly sank in. After months of delays and setbacks, after countless nights of worry, "It's really happening?" he whispered. Grace nodded, her own eyes glistening. The community pressure worked. Between Reverend Bell's congregation, the staff petition, and... She smiled. "Well, let's just say Mr. Harrington's new charity initiative made it hard for them to keep saying no." Eli's shoulders began to shake. He pressed his hand against the window, leaving a smudge on the glass he'd just cleaned. A tear rolled down his cheek, then another. "Hey," Grace said softly, touching his arm. "It's okay, I just..." Eli wiped his eyes with his sleeve. "I was starting to lose hope." "I know." Grace squeezed his arm gently. "But you never gave up." Noah never gave up. A night shift nurse walked by, noticed them, and broke into a wide smile. Word traveled fast in the hospital. Soon other staff members were gathering. Lila appeared as if summoned, wrapping Eli in a fierce hug. A cafeteria worker who always saved extra Jell-O for Noah clapped. Two respiratory therapists who regularly checked on the boy exchanged high fives. "I need to tell him," Eli said, straightening up and collecting himself. "He's been so patient." Grace nodded. "Go. I'll handle the pre-op paperwork. Just bring him down to get his labs done in about an hour." Eli practically floated down the hallway to Noah's room. His son sat cross-legged on the bed, carefully folding another paper crane. The windowsill was lined with them, a rainbow of origami hope. "Hey, buddy," Eli said, trying to keep his voice steady. Noah looked up, his small fingers pausing mid-fold. "Dad? Why is everyone so excited outside?" Eli sat on the edge of the bed, gathering his thoughts. "Remember how we've been waiting for the doctors to fix your special heart?" Noah nodded solemnly. "Like Superman getting his powers back. Exactly like that." Eli smiled. "Well, Dr. Grace says they're ready to do it tomorrow morning." Noah's eyes widened. "Really? No more waiting?" "No more waiting." Noah launched himself into his father's arms, the half-finished crane forgotten. Eli held him close, breathing in the familiar scent of his son's hair, feeling the quick flutter of his heart. The rest of the day passed in a blur of preparation. Blood tests, chest x-rays, final checks. The nurses brought Noah his favorite dinner, chicken nuggets shaped like dinosaurs. Lila stopped by with a hand-knitted blanket in superhero colors. As evening settled over the hospital, the excitement gave way to a quieter kind of peace. Noah lay in his bed, wrapped in Lila's blanket, while Eli sat in the chair beside him. "Tell me a story, Dad," Noah said softly. "A brave one." Eli thought for a moment, then smiled. "Once, there was a young warrior who had a very special heart. It didn't work quite like other hearts, but it was filled with more love and courage than anyone had ever seen." "Like my heart?" Noah asked. "Just like yours." Eli reached out to smooth his son's hair. This warrior made beautiful paper birds that carried wishes to heaven, and he never stopped believing that one day his heart would be made strong. Noah's eyes were getting heavy, but he fought to keep them open. "Was he scared sometimes?" "Yes," Eli admitted. "But being brave doesn't mean never being scared. It means facing your fears and keeping hope alive. Just like you do, every single day." "Are you scared, Dad?" The question caught Eli off guard. He considered lying, then remembered how his son always knew when he wasn't being truthful. "A little," he said honestly. "But I know Dr. Grace is the best warrior, healer in the whole hospital, and I know how strong you are." Noah yawned, snuggling deeper into his blanket. "I'm glad we're not alone anymore. We have Dr. Grace and Miss Lila and everyone." "That's right." Eli tucked the blanket more securely around his son. "We have a whole army of angels looking out for us now. Will you stay until I fall asleep?" "Of course." Eli leaned forward and kissed Noah's forehead. "Tomorrow, everything changes." He watched as Noah's eyes finally closed, his breathing evening out into the peaceful rhythm of sleep. The paper cranes cast delicate shadows on the wall, dancing in the soft light from the hallway. Each one carried a piece of their journey, a testament to Noah's unwavering spirit and the love that had carried them this far. Eli sat back in his chair, keeping his promise to stay, holding vigil over his sleeping son as the hospital settled into its nighttime routine. Tomorrow waited just around the corner, full of hope and possibility, but for now, this quiet moment was enough. The evening light painted long shadows across Noah's hospital room as Eli helped his son get comfortable in bed. Noah's collection of hand-drawn superhero pictures covered nearly every available wall space, creating a colorful cocoon around his bed. Paper cranes in various sizes hung from strings above, gently swaying in the air from the ventilation system. "Which story do you want tonight, buddy?" Eli asked, smoothing the thin hospital blanket over Noah's legs. Noah reached for his latest drawing, a crayon masterpiece showing a figure in surgical scrubs with giant angel wings. "Can you tell me about tomorrow again?" Eli's heart squeezed in his chest, but he kept his voice steady. "Sure thing, champ." He settled into the chair beside the bed, the familiar plastic cushion creaking under his weight. "Tomorrow morning, Dr. Whitaker and her team are going to fix that special heart of yours." "Will it hurt?" Noah's fingers traced the paper crane on his bedside table, one of the hundreds he'd folded during their long wait. "You'll be sleeping the whole time," Eli assured him. "Remember how Dr. Whitaker explained it? Like taking a really good nap while she does all the hard work." A gentle knock at the door drew their attention. Dr. Grace Whitaker stood in the doorway, her white coat exchanged for comfortable scrubs. "Mind if I join you two for a bit?" Noah's face lit up. "Dr. Grace, look at my drawing of you." He held up the winged surgeon picture proudly. Grace walked over, her eyes warming at the sight. "That's beautiful, Noah. Though I don't think my wings are quite that impressive in real life." She pulled up another chair next to Eli. "I thought you might like to hear exactly what's going to happen tomorrow, step by step." Eli nodded gratefully. He'd been trying to explain it to Noah, but having Grace here made everything feel more real, more manageable. "So," Grace began, her voice taking on a gentle storytelling quality, "first thing tomorrow morning, we're going to give you some special medicine that will help you fall into a very peaceful sleep." She pointed to Noah's foreline. "It'll go right through this tiny tube, so no extra pokes." Noah clutched his favorite stuffed penguin closer. "Will you be there when I fall asleep?" "I'll be right there," Grace promised. "And so will your dad, until you're completely dreaming," she continued explaining, using simple words that both Noah and Eli could understand. How they would carefully fix the tiny hole in Noah's heart, like patching a small tear in a favorite shirt. How the machines would help Noah breathe while they worked, keeping him safe and comfortable. How the nurses would watch over him like guardian angels throughout the whole procedure. Eli listened intently, his hand never leaving Noah's. Each detail Grace shared felt like another stone in a foundation of hope they were building together. "And, before you know it," Grace finished, "you'll wake up in the recovery room with your dad right beside you again." Noah yawned, his eyelids growing heavy. "Will my heart work better then?" "That's the plan, sweetheart," Grace said softly. "You'll be able to run and play without getting so tired." Eli helped Noah settle deeper into his pillows, arranging his penguin just the way he liked it. "Time for some sleep, buddy. Big day tomorrow. Can you stay?" Noah's voice was already drowsy. "I'm not going anywhere," Eli promised, giving his son's hand a gentle squeeze. Grace stood quietly, touching Eli's shoulder lightly. "Try to get some rest too," she whispered. "I'll see you both in the morning." After she left, Eli dimmed the lights but kept them bright enough for Noah to see the paper cranes overhead. The familiar nighttime sounds of the hospital filtered in distant voices, the soft squeak of rubber-soled shoes, the steady beeping of monitors. Noah's breathing gradually evened out into sleep, his small chest rising and falling beneath the blanket. Eli watched him, memorizing every detail of his son's peaceful face. The dark curls that needed trimming, the long eyelashes resting against his cheeks, the slight part of his lips as he dreamed. Eli's body felt heavy with exhaustion, but his mind raced with 1,000 thoughts. He remembered the first time he'd held Noah, barely bigger than his two hands combined. Teaching him to walk, to read, to fold his first paper crane. All the nights spent in hospital rooms just like this one, waiting and hoping. The chair wasn't comfortable, but Eli wouldn't have moved for anything. He kept his fingers wrapped gently around Noah's hand, his thumbs stroking small circles on his son's palm. Outside the room, nurses changed shifts. Equipment carts rolled past, and the great machine of the hospital continued its endless rhythm. Eli's eyes grew heavier as the hours crept by. He drifted in and out of consciousness, each time snapping awake to check on Noah before slowly sinking back into his uneasy rest. The paper cranes cast dancing shadows on the walls, like silent guardians watching over father and son as they waited for dawn. Dawn crept through the hospital windows, painting the corridors in pale golden light. Eli stood beside Noah's bed, watching his son's peaceful face as nurses prepped him for surgery. The paper cranes above swayed gently in the morning air, casting delicate shadows on the walls. "Almost ready, sweetheart," Sarah, the prep nurse, said softly as she adjusted Noah's foreline. "Dr. Whitaker will be here any minute to check on you before we head to the OR." Noah nodded bravely, his small hand squeezing his father's. "Dad, will you keep my special crane safe?" He pointed to the bright blue origami bird on his bedside table. Of course, Maijo. Eli's voice was steady despite the emotions churning inside him. He carefully tucked the paper crane into his shirt pocket, right over his heart. The calm morning routine shattered as footsteps echoed down the hallway, not the familiar click of Grace's heels, but the sharp staccato of multiple dress shoes. 3 people in dark suits appeared in the doorway, flanked by 2 members of the hospital board. "I need everyone to stop what they're doing," announced a stern-faced woman, holding up an official-looking badge. "I'm Amanda Chen from the State Medical Board. We're here conducting an immediate compliance audit." The nurses exchanged worried glances. Sarah's hands froze on Noah's IV pump. "What's happening?" Eli stepped forward, protective instinct flaring. "My son is scheduled for surgery in less than an hour." "I'm sorry, sir, but all procedures are temporarily suspended pending our investigation," Chen consulted her tablet. "We've received an anonymous complaint regarding improper approval processes and potential violations of hospital policy." More commotion erupted in the hallway. Grace appeared, still in her surgical scrubs, her face tight with controlled anger as she was followed by security personnel and another board member. "This is absolutely ridiculous," Grace protested, her voice carrying clearly into the room. "That child needs surgery today. The infection risk—" "Dr. Whitaker," interrupted one of the board members, "you are suspended from all duties effective immediately. Please surrender your hospital ID and vacate the premises." Noah's small voice quavered. "Dad? What's wrong with Dr. Grace?" Eli's heart clenched at the fear in his son's tone. He watched helplessly as a security guard took Grace's badge, her shoulders rigid with suppressed fury and despair. "Mr. Moreno," Chen addressed Eli directly, "we understand this is difficult, but the surgery cannot proceed until our audit is complete. Dr. Whitaker is barred from performing any procedures pending investigation." Grace locked eyes with Eli across the room, her gaze conveying both apology and determination. But before she could speak, she was firmly escorted away, leaving a horrible emptiness in her wake. The morning descended into chaos. Nurses hurried in and out, making phone calls and consulting charts. The board members huddled in the hallway, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. Through it all, Eli stood by Noah's bed, trying to project calm he didn't feel. "Everything's going to be okay, Maijo," he murmured, stroking Noah's hair. "We'll figure this out." But Noah's face had taken on a grayish tinge, and his breathing seemed more labored than usual. The heart monitor's steady beeping grew slightly faster, more irregular. Sarah noticed it too. She frowned at the vital signs display, then pressed her hand to Noah's forehead. "He's burning up," she announced, already reaching for the thermometer. 102.3. This isn't good. The next few minutes blurred into a nightmare. Noah's oxygen levels began to drop precipitously. His skin felt clammy under Eli's touch. The monitor's steady beeping transformed into urgent alarms. "Code Blue Team to Pediatrics," Sarah's voice rang out as she hit the emergency button. "Patient crashing, possible sepsis." Eli found himself pushed back as medical staff swarmed into the room. Through the chaos, he could see Noah's lips taking on a bluish tint, his small chest heaving with the effort to breathe. "No, no, no," Eli whispered, his legs giving way. He slid down the wall, the bright blue paper crane falling unnoticed from his pocket. The sound of alarms filled his ears as his world collapsed around him. "BP's dropping," someone called out. "Where's the crash cart? We need access to OR3 stat. That's not authorized during the audit. This child is coding. We need—" The voices blended together as Eli pressed his hands against his eyes, trying to block out the nightmare unfolding before him. His shoulders shook with silent sobs as the alarms continued their merciless warning. His son was slipping away, and the one doctor who could save him had been forced to leave. Through tear-blurred vision, Eli watched the medical team working frantically over Noah's bed. The paper cranes above swayed violently in the rush of activity, their shadows dancing like omens across the walls of the room that had become both sanctuary and prison. The chapel stood empty and dim in the late afternoon, its stained glass windows casting pools of colored light across the worn carpet. Eli burst through the heavy wooden doors, his steps echoing in the sacred silence. His work uniform was rumpled, his face lined with exhaustion and fear. He stumbled down the center aisle, past empty pews where countless others had sought comfort before him. His legs gave out at the front row, and he collapsed onto the hard wooden seat. The cross hung above, silent and steady. "Why?" The word tore from his throat, raw with emotion. His fists clenched until his knuckles turned white. We were so close. So close. The memory of that morning's chaos played through his mind. The state auditors in their crisp suits, the sudden suspension notice for Dr. Whitaker, Noah's monitors screaming as infection took hold. His son's pale face, as nurses rushed in with emergency medications. Eli's control finally shattered. He slammed his fist against the pew, the sharp crack echoing through the chapel. Again and again he struck, each impact punctuated by a sob that seemed ripped from his very soul. "He's just a boy," Eli's voice broke. "My boy! Please, he's all I have left." His hands stung, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the agony in his heart. He thought of his late wife Maria, how she'd always found strength in her faith, even during her illness. What would she tell him now? Eli's shoulders slumped. The anger drained away, leaving only bone-deep weariness. His bruised hands opened, palms up in surrender. "Be near," he whispered, the words barely audible in the stillness. "I don't understand. I can't do this alone anymore. Just be near." Tears rolled down his cheeks as he bowed his head. The colored light from the windows touched his face like gentle fingers, and for a moment the chapel's silence felt almost like an embrace. The soft click of the door opening barely registered. Quiet footsteps approached down the aisle, hesitant but purposeful. Eli didn't need to look up to know who it was. He recognized the careful way she walked, always mindful of disturbing others. Grace sat beside him on the pew, close but not touching. She wasn't wearing her white coat now, just street clothes that made her look smaller somehow, more human. Her presence carried none of its usual authority, only shared grief and determination. "I've been looking for you," she said softly, her voice gentle in the sacred space. Eli wiped roughly at his face with his sleeve. "Noah?" The question held all his fear. "Stable for now. The antibiotics are helping with the infection." Grace's hands were clasped tightly in her lap. "But we're running out of time. They won't let you operate." It wasn't a question, no. The word carried all her frustration. "But I have an idea. It's not perfect, but it might be our only chance." Eli turned to look at her properly. Grace's face showed the strain of the day, but her eyes held that familiar, determined glint he'd come to trust. "There's a partner children's hospital across the city," she explained. "They have an emergency exception protocol for critical cases. We could transfer Noah tonight, get him the surgery he needs before." She didn't finish the sentence. Hope flickered in Eli's chest, fragile as a candle flame. But we need board approval for the transfer. Even with the emergency protocol, they won't accept him without it." Grace's jaw tightened. "And after today's audit, they're not likely to be feeling generous." Eli closed his eyes, remembering all the times Noah had shown more courage than any child should need to have. His son's voice echoed in his memory. "Dad, sometimes you have to be brave even when you're scared, right?" "What do we need to do?" he asked, his voice steadier now. Grace reached over and gently touched his bruised knuckles, a gesture so unexpected it made his breath catch. "First, we need to get some ice for these hands. Then we fight, the right way, through proper channels. Together." Eli looked down at where her fingers rested on his hand. This brilliant surgeon, who had risked her career to help his son, who had shared her own painful past with him in this very chapel. Something shifted in his chest, a warmth that felt almost like faith. "Together," he agreed quietly. The colored light from the windows had deepened to evening hues, painting them both in shades of blue and gold. Outside these walls, a storm was gathering. But in this moment, neither of them was alone anymore. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead in the hospital corridor as Lila Banks straightened her Navy housekeeping uniform. Her weathered hands smoothed out invisible wrinkles, a nervous habit from decades of service. But tonight wasn't about cleaning. It was about standing together. "Everyone line up along the walls," she directed in a hushed but firm voice. "Keep the middle clear, for doctors and emergencies." Her tone carried the quiet authority that had earned her respect through the years. Hospital staff began gathering, first the night shift custodians, then cafeteria workers still in their hairnets, followed by nurses who could step away from their stations. They pressed themselves against the walls of the long hallway, leading to the administrative wing, creating a human corridor of silent solidarity. Someone passed out small battery-operated candles. Real flames weren't allowed in the hospital. The soft, artificial glow flickered across determined faces as more people joined, parents of other sick children, volunteers, even some recovering patients in wheelchairs. "Remember now," Lila whispered, moving down the line. "This is a peaceful vigil. We're here to open hearts, not close minds." She stopped to adjust an elderly volunteer's shawl with maternal care. The first notes of "Amazing Grace" floated softly from the back of the crowd. Sister Mary from the chapel had begun to hum, and others joined in, the melody spreading like a gentle wave through the gathered crowd. Their voices blended in perfect harmony, echoing off the sterile walls and transforming the institutional space into something sacred. Reverend Bell arrived, her clerical collar stark against her dark suit. She moved through the crowd, stopping to squeeze shoulders and whisper prayers. When she reached Lila, they exchanged a knowing look. This wasn't just about one boy anymore. It was about every patient who had ever been turned away, every family who had ever counted pennies for medicine. A young nurse rushed up to Lila, anxiety clear on her face. "Mrs. Banks, security's asking if we have a permit for this." Lila drew herself up to her full height. "Tell them we're having a prayer meeting. Last I checked, that's still allowed in a hospital chapel corridor." Her voice carried just enough steel to brook no argument, but her smile remained gentle. More people continued arriving. Lab technicians, physical therapists, even some doctors who had finished their shifts. They filled the hallway with their presence, each person holding their electric candle like a tiny beacon of hope. Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound. The hymn grew stronger as more voices joined in. "That saved a wretch like me." Someone from the local news station appeared with a camera crew, drawn by tweets from hospital staff. Their presence added weight to the moment, but nobody played to the cameras. This wasn't about publicity. It was about principle. The singing shifted to "This Little Light of Mine," and Lila noticed tears streaming down the face of a young mother cradling her sleeping infant. She made her way over and wrapped an arm around the woman's shoulders. "My baby needed surgery too," the mother whispered. "We almost couldn't afford it." "Then you know why we're here," Lila responded softly. "For all the babies." Word spread through the crowd. Board members were coming down. The singing grew louder, more determined. "This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine." The elevator doors opened, and 3 members of the hospital board stepped out, their expressions a mix of annoyance and discomfort. Behind them, more news cameras appeared, capturing their reactions. The board chairman, Dr. Harrison, surveyed the scene with tight lips. His eyes met Lila's, and she held his gaze steadily, neither challenging nor backing down, just witnessing, as she had witnessed countless times before. More board members arrived, drawn by urgent texts from their colleagues. They couldn't ignore this show of unity, this peaceful demonstration of community concern. The cameras captured it all: the singing crowd, the glowing candles, the stark contrast between the suits and scrubs. A reporter approached one of the board members with a microphone, asking about Noah's case and the hospital's policies. The board member stammered something about reviewing procedures and complex situations. But the real story was in the images being broadcast. Hundreds of people, from every department and walk of life, standing together in silent witness. The light from their electric candles reflected in their eyes, in their tears, in their unwavering hope. Lila moved through the crowd again, straightening a crooked name badge here, offering a tissue there. She was doing what she had always done, taking care of people. But tonight, that care took the form of organizing resistance, of standing up for what was right. The hymns continued, one flowing into another. "We shall overcome," merged into Lean on me. The voices rising and falling, like waves of determination. The board members huddled together, speaking in urgent whispers as more cameras arrived. Local news anchors did quiet stand-ups at the edges of the crowd, their voices barely audible as they reported on the spontaneous demonstration of support for a child denied surgery. Social media lit up with images of the vigil, spreading the story beyond the hospital walls. Through it all, Lila maintained her quiet presence, the steady heart of this peaceful protest. She had seen too much in her years at the hospital to believe in easy victories. But she had also seen enough miracles to never stop believing in the power of people standing together. The board members finally retreated to their conference room, their faces troubled. They couldn't ignore this display of unity, this silent testimony to the community's demands for compassion over profits. The cameras followed their departure, capturing every moment for the evening news. As the last board member disappeared behind closing elevator doors, Lila looked around at the gathered crowd, her hospital family, and the broader community they served. They were still singing, still holding their lights high, still standing in witness to the power of collective action and shared humanity. The news cameras panned across the scene one final time. Hundreds of electric candles glowing in the darkened hallway, hundreds of voices raised in song, hundreds of hearts beating as one for a child they had never met but whose cause they had made their own. The hospital hallway glowed with the warm light of 100 electric candles, their artificial flames steady in the hands of those gathered. Reverend www.o. Audrey Bell stood at the center of the vigil, her silver hair catching the light as she surveyed the crowd. Her eyes, kind but determined, found Charles Harrington standing awkwardly at the edge of the gathering. "Mr. Harrington," she called out, her voice carrying the weight of decades of pastoral care. "Would you join us, please?" The wealthy donor hesitated, his polished shoes squeaking slightly on the linoleum floor. He tugged at his expensive tie, clearly uncomfortable with all the eyes turning toward him. But Reverend Bell's gentle insistence left no room for retreat. "Maribel," Reverend Bell continued, "you and Mateo come forward too, dear." Maribel Santos emerged from the crowd, holding 6-year-old Mateo's hand. Her hotel catering uniform was crisp despite the late hour, her head held high despite the whispers that followed. Mateo bounced slightly on his feet, waving at Harrington with his free hand. The three of them, the powerful donor, the hard-working mother, and the innocent child, stood before the assembled crowd. The contrast between Harrington's tailored suit and Maribel's work uniform spoke volumes about the divisions they were trying to bridge. "Hi, Mr. Harrington," Mateo chirped, breaking the tension. A few people chuckled softly, and something in Harrington's stiff posture crumbled. "The time for hiding is over," Reverend Bell said quietly. But her words carried through the hushed corridor. "Sometimes God gives us chances to right our wrongs, to heal what's broken. This is such a moment." Harrington cleared his throat, his hands trembling slightly as he pulled a folded paper from his jacket pocket. He looked at Mateo's bright, expectant face, then at Maribel's cautious expression. Finally, he turned to face the crowd. "I've spent years," he began, his voice rough with emotion, "protecting my reputation, my image, he swallowed hard, "my lies." His eyes met Maribel's. "I'm sorry." Maribel's chin lifted slightly, tears shining in her eyes but refusing to fall. "This is my son," Harrington continued, placing a gentle hand on Mateo's shoulder. "Mateo Santos. And I've failed him and his mother for far too long." A collective breath seemed to move through the crowd. Nurses squeezed each other's hands, custodians leaned on their mops. Families held their children closer. "But that ends tonight." Harrington's voice grew stronger. "I'm establishing the Harrington Promise Fund, effective immediately. It will cover Noah Moreno's emergency transfer and surgery." He paused, looking at the paper in his hands before crumpling it up. "And every other child who needs care but can't afford it. No conditions, no delays, no excuses." Mateo beamed up at him, and Harrington's hand tightened slightly on the boy's shoulder. "I'm done hiding behind boardroom decisions and quarterly metrics," he declared. "These children, all of them, deserve better than that. My son deserves better than that." The board members, who had been watching from the edge of the gathering, shifted uncomfortably. But they couldn't ignore the phones recording every word, the news cameras capturing this moment of truth. Maribel stepped forward, her voice clear and strong. "Thank you," she said simply, dignity in every syllable. The first notes of Amazing Grace started somewhere in the back of the crowd. Lila Banks's rich alto voice led the way, and others joined in, the hymn swelling through the hospital corridor. The sound wrapped around them all. Wealthy donor and working mother, doctors and janitors, patients and families, binding them together in something larger than themselves. The board chairman stepped forward, his face flushed. "We will approve the emergency transfer for Noah Moreno," he announced, nearly drowned out by the singing. "And Dr. Whitaker is reinstated, effective immediately." The hymn transformed into applause, thunderous in the confined space. Mateo hugged Harrington's legs, and after a moment's hesitation, the man bent down to properly embrace his son. Maribel wiped away a tear, smiling despite herself. Reverend Bell raised her hands, and the crowd gradually quieted. "This is what healing looks like," she said softly. "Not just bodies, but hearts. Not just one child, but a whole community. Let's pray that this night marks a new beginning for all of us." The electric candles glowed steadier than ever as the gathered people bowed their heads, hope burning brighter than any fear or division that had come before. The rain started as a whisper against the hospital windows, but quickly grew into a furious drumbeat. Inside Noah's room, the medical team worked with practiced efficiency to prepare him for transfer. Machines beeped steadily, their rhythmic sounds a counterpoint to the storm building outside. Eli stood close to Noah's bed, his work uniform still on from his shift. His large, calloused hands were gentle as he smoothed Noah's dark hair back from his forehead. The boy's face was pale, but his eyes held that familiar spark of courage. "Ready for our adventure, buddy?" Eli asked, keeping his voice steady despite the worry gnawing at his chest. Noah nodded weakly. "Like astronauts going to a new space station," he whispered, managing a small smile. Grace moved through the room in street clothes instead of her usual white coat, directing the transfer team with quiet authority. Her suspension meant she couldn't officially practice here, but she refused to abandon Noah now. She checked his vital signs one more time, her movements precise and reassuring. "The Children's Hospital has one of the best pediatric cardiac units in the state," she told Eli, her voice low and determined. "We'll be there in 20 minutes. Thunder rolled outside as 2 paramedics wheeled in a stretcher. They worked quickly to move Noah, carefully shifting him along with his IV lines and monitoring equipment. Eli noticed how they spoke directly to Noah, explaining each step with kind voices. "Looking good, Space Cadet," one of them said, securing the straps. "Mission control is all set for launch." The hallway lights flickered as they wheeled Noah toward the elevator. Hospital staff lined the corridor, nurses, orderlies, and cleaning crews who had come to know the quiet boy with the paper cranes. Lila Banks stood near the elevator, pressing something into Eli's hand as they passed. "A prayer cloth from the church, ladies," she whispered. "We'll be right here praying." The elevator descended to the ambulance bay where rain fell in heavy sheets. Wind whipped at their clothes as they rushed Noah's stretcher to the waiting ambulance. Water pooled around their feet, and lightning split the sky in brilliant forks. Inside the ambulance, Eli settled onto a small bench beside Noah's stretcher. Grace climbed in after them, positioning herself where she could monitor Noah's vitals during the ride. The paramedics secured the doors and jumped into the front cab. The ambulance pulled out into the storm-dark streets, sirens wailing. Rain hammered against the roof like thousands of tiny fists. Through the back windows, Eli watched the hospital's lights grow distant and blur in the downpour. Noah's hand found his father's, small fingers squeezing with surprising strength. "Dad, will you tell me about Mom's garden again?" Eli's throat tightened. He glanced at Grace, who nodded encouragingly while checking Noah's oxygen levels. "Well, your mom loved purple irises best," Eli began, his voice growing stronger as he shared the familiar story. "She planted them all along the back fence. In spring, they'd stand so tall and proud, like little flags waving in the breeze. The ambulance swayed as it navigated the rain-slicked streets. Grace steadied herself against the wall, never taking her eyes off Noah's monitors. Lightning flashed again, illuminating her face, tired but fiercely focused. She'd spend hours out there, Eli continued, thumb rubbing circles on Noah's palm. Said every flower needed its own special attention. Just like you, Mijo. She'd be so proud of how brave you're being. Noah's eyes were getting heavy, but he fought to keep them open. Did she sing to them? I remember singing. Every morning. Eli smiled. She said plants grow better with music. Remember that old Spanish lullaby? Through the storm's fury, Eli hummed softly, the melody rising and falling like his wife's voice from years ago. Grace checked Noah's heart rate, noting how it steadied slightly at the familiar tune. The ambulance rocked suddenly as wind buffeted its sides. Medical equipment swayed on their hooks, and Grace reached out to stabilize an IV pole. Noah's grip tightened on his father's hand. Almost there, Grace assured them, her voice calm despite the chaos outside. You're doing great, Noah. Through the front windshield, they could see the Children's Hospital rising ahead. A modern building of glass and steel. Its windows glowed warmly against the storm's darkness. The ambulance turned into the emergency bay just as another massive thunderclap shook the air. As they backed up to the entrance, the hospital's lights flickered ominously. Grace exchanged glances with the paramedics. Backup generators are ready, one of them confirmed. They've got triple redundancy for the operating rooms. The rear doors opened to reveal a waiting trauma team. Rain blew sideways into the ambulance as they prepared to move Noah inside. Thunder crashed again, and for a moment the hospital went dark before emergency lights hummed to life. Through the chaos of the storm, Eli held tight to his son's hand, praying silently as they rushed toward the building's shelter. Grace moved alongside the stretcher. Her presence, steady as lightning, once again illuminated their way into the Children's Hospital. Thunder cracked overhead as Grace stood at the scrub sink, methodically washing her hands up to her elbows. The harsh antibacterial soap couldn't mask the metallic smell of the coming storm. Through the small window above the sink, lightning illuminated the dark sky in violent bursts. The operating room buzzed with focused energy as nurses and technicians prepared their instruments. The anesthesiologist carefully monitored Noah's vitals on the screens, making minor adjustments to keep him stable. Despite the controlled chaos around her, Grace maintained her ritual. 20 seconds per hand, clean under each nail, between each finger. The familiar motions helped steady her racing thoughts. Up in the observation room, Eli pressed his palm against the glass, watching Grace's precise movements. His son looked so small on the operating table, nearly swallowed up by the blue surgical drapes. A paper crane sat in Eli's shirt pocket, the last one Noah had folded before being wheeled in. The lights flickered ominously. Everyone in the OR froze for a moment, then resumed their tasks with increased urgency. A maintenance worker burst through the door of the observation room, startling Eli. "Sir, we need help with the backup generators," the man said, breathless. "The storm's knocked out main power in half the building. Someone said you worked with field generators in the service?" Eli glanced back at Noah, torn between staying and helping. The lights dimmed again, longer this time. His military training kicked in. He knew how crucial stable power was during surgery. "I'll help," he said firmly. "But I need updates on my son." The maintenance worker nodded, already heading for the door. "We'll keep a line open to the OR, come on!" They jogged through dim hallways to the basement, where the backup generators hummed and sputtered. The air was thick with the smell of diesel and ozone. 2 other maintenance workers were already there, looking overwhelmed, as warning lights flashed on the control panels. "The main coupling's going," one called out. "We can't stabilize the output." Eli rolled up his sleeves, muscle memory from his military days taking over. "Show me the setup," he ordered, voice steady despite his racing heart. The workers quickly stepped aside, explaining the system. Upstairs in the OR, Grace finished scrubbing and held her arms up as a nurse helped her into her surgical gown and gloves. The monitors beeped steadily, but the power fluctuations made her uneasy. She thought of Eli watching from above, of his unwavering faith in her, of her brother, lost so many years ago. "Not this time," she whispered to herself. The head nurse approached her. "Dr. Whitaker, Mr. Moreno is helping stabilize the generators. He wanted you to know." Grace nodded, unsurprised. Of course Eli would find a way to help. Even now. It was who he was. The man who gave away his last $5, who mopped floors with dignity, who never stopped fighting for his son. In the basement, Eli worked with focused intensity. His hands moved surely over the machinery, adjusting connections and reading gauges. "The secondary coupling needs to be reinforced," he explained to the maintenance team. "The load's too much for a single circuit." Lightning struck nearby, making the building shudder. Warning lights flashed on the generator panel. But Eli was already moving, redirecting power flow through alternate pathways. The machine steadied, their hum growing more consistent. Back in the OR, Grace positioned herself at the operating table. Noah's small chest rose and fell with mechanical precision under the ventilator. The surgical team stood ready, instruments gleaming under the bright lights. There could be no margin for error, no room for doubt. "Scalpel," she said clearly, holding out her hand. The familiar weight of the instrument grounded her. In her mind, she saw her brother's face, then Noah's brave smile. The lights hummed steadily now, thanks to Eli's work below. Grace steadied her hands over Noah's tiny heart, years of training and determination focusing into this single moment. "Not this time," she murmured, and began the first incision. In the basement, Eli wiped sweat from his forehead with his sleeve, eyes fixed on the power readings. The generators purred smoothly now, their synchronized rhythm reminiscent of his military days, keeping medical units powered in the field. One of the maintenance workers clapped him on the shoulder. "You've done all you can here," the worker said kindly. "Go be with your boy." Eli hesitated, then nodded. He'd fought his battle here, now it was up to Grace to fight hers in the OR. He took the stairs 2 at a time, the paper crane crinkling in his pocket with each step. When he reached the observation room, he found it full of familiar faces. Lila, Reverend Bell, even some of his fellow janitors, all there to support him and Noah. Through the glass, he watched Grace work with unwavering focus, her movements precise and sure. The lights stayed strong and steady, pushing back against the storm's fury outside. Eli pressed his hand against the glass again, and prayed. The operating room lights flickered ominously as another thunderclap shook the building. Grace's hands remained perfectly steady above Noah's exposed heart, but her jaw tightened. The backup generators were struggling against the storm's fury, primary power dropping to 60%. A technician called out from his monitoring station. The vital sign monitors beeped steadily, running on their own battery backups, but the main surgical lights wavered again. Down in the basement, Eli wiped sweat from his forehead as he crouched next to the hospital's maintenance supervisor beside the auxiliary generator. His military training had taught him about these systems, and his years as a janitor had familiarized him with every corner of hospital infrastructure. "The connection's loose here," Eli said, pointing to a critical junction box. "We need to stabilize it, or the whole system could fail." The supervisor handed him a wrench, trusting his expertise. Eli's hands were shaking, but he forced them to steady as he worked. Every turn of the wrench was for Noah. Every careful adjustment was a prayer. Back in the OR, Grace spoke in calm, measured tones. "Suction, please." A nurse quickly cleared her field of vision. The delicate repair work on Noah's tiny heart required perfect precision. One wrong move, one moment of doubt, and all could be lost. BP holding steady at 90/60, the anesthesiologist reported. Oxygen saturation at 94%. Grace nodded without looking up. Her world had narrowed to the size of a child's heart, every detail magnified through her surgical loops. The arterial wall was paper thin, requiring the smallest sutures they had. Each stitch had to be perfect. The lights dimmed again, longer this time. Several staff members held their breath. "Status on backup power?" Grace asked, her voice tight but controlled. "Auxiliary systems at 40% and dropping," a nurse reported after checking the panel. "Engineering is working on it." In the basement, Eli and the maintenance team raced against time. They had managed to stabilize one generator, but the second was showing signs of strain. Eli's shirt was soaked through with sweat as he worked, remembering his army training from decades ago. "The coupling's about to blow," the supervisor warned, pointing to an overheating connection. "Not if I can help it," Eli muttered. He grabbed a replacement part from the emergency kit and began the delicate process of switching it out while the generator was still running. One wrong move could shut down power to half the hospital. The lights in the OR dimmed to emergency levels. The vital sign monitors switched to battery power, their beeping more urgent now. "Come on, Eli," Grace whispered to herself, never taking her eyes off her careful suture work. She knew he was down there, fighting just as hard as she was to save their boy. The thought gave her strength. Through the semi-darkness, Grace's hands moved with practiced precision. The repair was nearly complete, but these final stitches were crucial. The operating room fell into tense silence, broken only by the steady beep of monitors and the distant rumble of thunder. In the basement, Eli's fingers moved with desperate care over the generator's connections. Sweat dripped into his eyes, but he couldn't spare a hand to wipe it away. Every second counted. "Almost there," he said through gritted teeth. "Just need to." With a solid click and the whir of machinery, the generator stabilized. The maintenance supervisor quickly checked the readings. "Power levels rising," he called out. "We're back to 80%. Upstairs, the OR lights brightened to full strength. Grace allowed herself the smallest smile behind her surgical mask as she tied off the final suture. The repair was complete. Now came the moment of truth. "Beginning to come off bypass," the perfusionist announced. The machine that had been pumping Noah's blood during surgery gradually reduced its support, allowing his heart to take over. The room held its breath. The monitor showed a weak, irregular rhythm at first. Grace watched intently, her hands hovering ready if needed. The seconds stretched like hours. Then, like sunrise breaking through storm clouds, Noah's heart found its strength. The monitor's erratic spikes smoothed into strong, steady peaks. Color flooded back into the small boy's cheeks, replacing the pale blue tinge with healthy pink. A collective exhale swept through the operating room. The anesthesiologist's shoulders relaxed as he reported, "Pressure stabilizing, oxygen saturation improving. Heart rate strong and regular." Grace straightened up, finally allowing herself to feel the ache in her back from hours of standing, bent over the operating table. She looked at Noah's repaired heart, now beating with newfound strength, and felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. "Close for me, please," she said to her assistant, her voice thick with emotion. She stepped back from the table, pulling off her gloves. Through the observation window, she could see Eli had made it up from the basement. Their eyes met across the distance, and she gave him a small nod. His hands came up to cover his face as he slid down the wall in relief, overwhelmed by the moment. The storm outside was beginning to pass, its fury spent. Inside, in the warm light of the operating room, Noah's monitor beeped out a strong, steady rhythm, the sound of a miracle hard-won through skill, determination, and the combined efforts of a father's love and a doctor's dedication. Sunlight streamed through the pediatric ward windows, casting warm patches across the gleaming floor. Noah Marino took careful steps down the hallway, his hospital gown replaced with soft pajamas covered in superhero patterns. His paper crane mobile swayed gently in his hands, each colorful bird dancing with his movements. Though his steps were measured, his smile radiated pure joy. "Look, Dad, I'm getting faster," Noah called out, his voice stronger than it had been in weeks. Eli sat in a nearby chair, his eyes never leaving his son. His work uniform was crisp. He'd insisted on keeping his shifts even during Noah's recovery. But the exhausted slump of his shoulders had been replaced with relaxed contentment. "Steady there, champion. No racing yet." Dr. Grace Whitaker stood at the nurse's station, pretending to review charts while watching Noah's progress. Her white coat pocket bulged with the day's collection of Noah's paper cranes. He'd insisted on making one for every person who'd helped save his life. The simple gestures of gratitude had moved several nurses to tears. "His cardiac output is excellent," Grace said softly to Eli. "The tissue is healing exactly as we'd hoped." She didn't add the technical details, that Noah's heart was now pumping with a strength she'd barely dared to dream of during those tense hours in surgery. A burst of laughter echoed down the corridor as Maribel and Mateo arrived for their daily visit. Mateo clutched a new picture book, while Maribel carried a Tupperware container that steamed promisingly. "Noah!" Mateo called out, rushing forward before his mother caught his collar gently. "Careful, mi amor," Maribel reminded him. "Remember what we talked about?" Mateo nodded solemnly and approached Noah at a walk instead of a run. "I brought you my favorite dinosaur book," he announced, "and Mama made a rose con polo." Noah's face lit up. "Real food?" The hospital meals, while nutritious, had grown tiresome. Grace pretended to look stern. "As long as you eat slowly and finish your vegetables first." The boys settled into the small playroom attached to Noah's private room, a luxury made possible by the newly established Harrington Promise Fund. Speaking of which, Charles Harrington himself appeared in the doorway, looking both more rumpled and more human than he had during his polished donor appearances. "How's our star patient today?" he asked. His usual boardroom confidence softened into genuine concern. "Getting stronger every day," Grace answered professionally, but her smile was warm. The change in Harrington had been remarkable since his public acknowledgement of Mateo. The hard shell of corporate precision had cracked, revealing a man learning, however late, to open his heart. "The first round of Promise Fund applications are being processed," Harrington reported. 10 children, already approved for necessary surgeries. He glanced at Noah, then back to Grace. "The board has also agreed to establish the Whitaker Moreno Fellowship for Compassionate Care. We'd like you to help design the program." Grace blinked in surprise. Eli reached over and squeezed her hand briefly, a gesture of shared pride that sent an unexpected warmth through her fingers. Maribel stepped forward, her head high. "Mr. Harrington, I wanted to thank you. The legal team you provided, they've been very helpful in securing Mateo's future." Harrington's eyes softened as he watched his son showing Noah how to pronounce the longest dinosaur names. "I should have done it years ago, Miss Santos, but I promise you both, things will be different now." The afternoon passed in gentle conversation and shared meals. Noah dozed off while Mateo read to him, the book open across both their laps. Nurses stopped by with encouragement, and Lila Banks appeared with fresh cookies that filled the room with the scent of cinnamon. Later, as the sun began to set, Grace gathered her things to leave. She'd been putting in extra hours, ensuring Noah's recovery stayed on track, but tonight she'd accepted Eli's invitation for coffee on his porch. It wasn't quite a date. They both carefully avoided using that word, but it held the whisper of possibility. She found Eli in Noah's room, tucking a blanket around both sleeping boys. "I can wake Mateo," she offered. "Let Maribel take him home." Eli shook his head. "Let them rest. Maribel's picking up an extra shift at the hotel. I told her I'd keep an eye on Mateo until she's done." He smiled at the peaceful scene. "It's good for Noah to have a friend close by." They walked together to the elevator, comfortable in their shared silence. The hospital corridors held different memories now. Not just of fear and waiting, but of community rising up, of courage rewarded, of healing that went deeper than medicine. "Ready to head home?" Grace asked as they reached the lobby. "More than ready," Eli answered. "Though it feels strange, leaving him overnight, even knowing he's okay now. The night staff has strict instructions to call me if anything changes," Grace assured him. "But his latest scans were perfect. He's really healing, Eli." They stepped out into the evening air, the storm clouds of that terrible night replaced by stars appearing in the darkening sky. Grace's sensible sedan was parked next to Eli's old pickup truck. "Follow me," he suggested. "It's not far." Minutes later, they sat on Eli's modest front porch, steam rising from 2 mugs of coffee. The street was quiet except for distant choir practice at Reverend Bell's church. The simple wooden porch swing creaked gently as they settled in. "I never properly thanked you," Eli said softly, "for everything you did for Noah, for us." Grace cradled her mug, remembering that first early morning when a kind stranger had bought her coffee with his last $5. "You taught me something too," she replied. "About faith, about dignity, about doing what's right even when it seems impossible." Their eyes met, and in that moment of shared understanding, something shifted, like the first paper crane taking flight, like the first strong beat of a healed heart. The old church glowed in the late morning sunlight. Stained glass windows cast rainbow patches across worn wooden pews, where familiar faces filled every row. The usual Sunday quiet was replaced by a gentle buzz of excitement as the congregation watched a small figure carefully making his way up the altar steps. Noah Moreno moved slowly but steadily, his surgical scar hidden beneath a pressed white shirt. In his hands, he held a delicate paper crane, the last of hundreds that now decorated the sanctuary. Each origami bird represented a child who would receive care through the new Harrington Promise Fund, their wings catching light like tiny prayers taking flight. Eli stood at the bottom of the steps, ready to steady his son if needed, but Noah didn't falter. His determined expression mirrored his father's as he reached up to tie the final crane to the string that stretched above the altar. The paper bird twirled gently, joining its colorful companions in their silent dance. "Perfect," Noah whispered, stepping back to admire his work. From the choir section, Lila Banks adjusted her purple robe and raised her hands. The rustle of hymnals filled the air as the congregation stood. Her voice, rich and clear, led them into Amazing Grace. The familiar melody swelled, lifting toward the paper crane constellation above. Reverend Audrey Bell stood at the pulpit, her weathered face serene as she watched Noah make his careful way back to his father. She had seen many miracles in her years of ministry, but few had touched her heart like this one. The entire community had come together, proving that love could move mountains, or in this case, hospital boards. "Let us pray," she said when the hymn ended, her voice carrying to every corner. "Today we celebrate not just one child's healing, but the promise of healing for many. Through the grace of God and the hearts of His people, doors have been opened. What was broken has been mended. What was lost has been found." Noah slipped his small hand into his father's larger one as Reverend Bell continued. In the pew behind them sat Dr. Grace Whitaker, her usual white coat replaced by a simple blue dress. She watched Eli's broad shoulders, remembering how they'd slumped with worry just weeks ago. Now they were straight and strong, though trembling slightly with emotion. The morning light strengthened, pouring through the windows in earnest now. It caught the paper cranes, making them seem to glow from within. Each one cast tiny shadows that danced across the altar like butterfly wings. "And now," Reverend Bell's voice softened, "I ask this congregation to stand as we bless this fellowship. In every crane above us, we see hope. In every face before us, we see love. In every heart that beats here today, we see God's endless grace." The congregation rose. Lila's choir began to hum softly, a gentle foundation for Reverend Bell's words. In the front row, Maribel stood with Mateo, her head held high. Charles Harrington sat with them, his hand resting gently on his son's shoulder. The past weeks had changed him too. His expensive suit couldn't hide the new humility in his bearing. Hospital staff filled several pews: nurses, orderlies, cafeteria workers, and cleaning crew members who had stood vigil that desperate night. They were all family now, bound by something stronger than job titles or social status. "These paper cranes," Reverend Bell gestured upward, "remind us that the smallest hands can create something beautiful, that the simplest act of kindness can start a revolution of love, that no child should be turned away from healing because of earthly circumstances." Noah looked up at the fluttering shapes above, pride shining in his eyes. He'd folded each one with careful attention, even when his hands were shaky from medication. Every crane carried a prayer, a hope, a promise. "And now," Reverend Bell smiled, "let us bow our heads in final blessing." The church grew quiet. Sunlight streamed in, warm and golden. Eli closed his eyes, feeling tears slip down his cheeks. His whisper was barely audible, but it carried all the weight of his heart. "Thank you." Grace stood beside him, close enough to feel the tremor that ran through his body. Her own eyes glistened as she watched this man, who had bought her coffee with his last $5, never knowing she would help save his son. Now they stood together in a light that seemed to hold all the hope and love in the world. The paper cranes turned slowly overhead, their shadows dancing across the congregation like promises taking wing. "What would you do if you were in their place?" Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you thought this was just the beginning, you're right. Click through and see where the story takes you next. If you enjoyed the story of Eli Moreno, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.